She sits alone, barefoot, bruised and silent, in a market where nothing is bought, and no one comes to claim. Around her, blocks of ice preserve memories like tombs. Worn-out teddy bears, soldier boots, tiny backpacks, fragments of lives once lived. Above her, a faded sign swings in the wind. Unclaimed, final offers. No one remembers when the world stopped, or why time chose to freeze here, in this forgotten corner between life and afterlife. The air hums with things left unsaid, apologies never spoken, promises broken, people erased without a trace. She remembers everything. Each cube of ice is a chapter from her past. Family, friends, innocence, resistance, loss. They were offered to the world's last salvation, but no one ever came back. Now, she remains, the keeper of a frozen truth. But something is changing. The ice cracks, the sky shifts, and she is offered one last choice. Keep the past frozen forever or melt it and face what comes next. What would you choose, memory or motion? Stillness or freedom? In a world built on loss, even silence carries a scream. The market had been abandoned for so long that the rust on the iron beams had turned the color of dried blood. The wind sighed through the hollow skeleton of stalls, carrying the scent of stale earth and old machinery, a smell that clung to the skin and refused to wash away. It was a place meant for trade once, for bargaining, for voices calling out prices, for children tugging at their mother's sleeves, wanting sweets or shoes. But those days were gone. Now the market was something else, something far colder. Glassy blocks of ice, massive and translucent, were stacked in rows where vendors once stood. Inside each block, objects were perfectly preserved, like precious museum exhibits. Teddy bears with button eyes, a child's worn-out sneaker, a military-grade backpack with the name patch still attached. These were things left behind when the world's heart had stopped beating, things nobody had claimed. Above it all hung a sign, half-torn, letters scrawled in black, bleached by wind and sun. Unclaimed, final offers. The irony was almost cruel. There were no offers left here, no bargaining to be done, only loss on display. In the middle of this silent graveyard, a girl sat alone. Her hair was a harsh platinum blonde, streaked with ash and dust, tangled like seaweed after a storm. Her skin was marked with deep blue bruises, purple streaks like half-finished tattoos across her arms and collarbone. A thin, torn slip of a dress clung to her frame, ragged at the hem, too fragile to fight the wind. She was barefoot, toes curled into the cold ground as if she needed to feel something real. Around her, the ice hummed in the sunlight. Tiny cracks spidered across the surfaces, but none had broken yet. The ice was patient. So was she. She sat cross-legged, one hand extended as if waiting for someone to place a coin, or perhaps a sign of mercy, in her palm. But there were no coins. There was no one left. Only ghosts, frozen in glass. Her name had been lost long ago. The world did not bother remembering names anymore, not since the collapse. She had once been a sister, a daughter, a lover, even a soldier. Now she was something else, a witness, a survivor among ruins. Or maybe a prisoner, trapped in a world unwilling to let go of its own memories. The ice was full of those memories. If you looked closely, you could see them. A teddy bear gripped tight by a child on their last day. A pair of shoes scuffed and stained from 1,000 small journeys. A soldier's badge still polished, even in deathly chill. Every item was a story paused mid-sentence. In the distance, mountains rose sharp against the turquoise sky, jagged as broken glass. Their peaks were hidden under a layer of white mist, as if the world itself was too afraid to look upon their true face. The land between the market and the mountains was nothing but dry, scorched ground, littered with the metal bones of machines that would never run again. Sometimes she thought she heard them, the voices, faint, muffled, tangled in the wind. "Please, don't leave me here. Where is my mother? I'm cold." She would squeeze her eyes shut, pressing her bruised knees to her chest, trying to drown them out. But the voices always came back, drifting between the ice cubes like whispers of unfinished lullabies. She could not decide if they were real. Maybe they were just in her head. Maybe the guilt had carved them there, unwilling to let her rest. Because if there was one thing the collapse had left her with, it was guilt, heavy as iron, cold as the ice around her. A shoe thumped against one of the ice blocks as a sudden gust tore through the abandoned market, making the sign overhead swing violently. The letters screeched on their rusted hinges, an eerie music for a dead place. She didn't flinch. No reason to. She had flinched enough in her life. Instead, she let the wind pass through her, carrying away another shred of warmth. There was little left in her to lose. Day after day, she sat among these frozen trophies, a queen on a throne of emptiness, waiting, watching, guarding. Was she hoping someone would come? Maybe. Maybe someone who remembered these final offers, these lost lives, would arrive to claim them. Maybe they would bring fire to melt the ice, and hands to hold the trembling children. Maybe they would remember the girl herself, call her by a name she had nearly forgotten. But each sunrise came alone. Each sunset left her lonelier. The ice did not care. It would stand here 1,000 years if needed, keeping its secrets, protecting its prisoners. The girl was no different from the objects it entombed, a relic, perfectly preserved by the cruelty of time. Above her, the sign creaked again, unclaimed, final offers. And somewhere far away, thunder rolled across the mountains, as if the world was still trying to decide whether it wanted to wake up or keep sleeping. She lowered her hand, folding it against her heart. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow someone will come. But tomorrow never came. Not here. Not anymore. She hadn't always been alone. Once, her world had been filled with warmth. Not the artificial heat of burning metal or dying stars, but the warmth of arms wrapped around her, of whispered laughter shared under broken rooftops, of names spoken with love. But that world had died long before the ice arrived, long before she found herself in this place where even memories froze if you let them linger too long. Her name, what had it been? It hovered at the edge of her consciousness, like a dream just out of reach. Sometimes, in sleep, she heard it spoken, a soft voice, probably her mother's, calling her in the dusk. But the syllables slipped away when she opened her eyes. She had stopped trying to remember. Names, after all, didn't survive here. Only silence did. What she did remember were faces, a boy with soot on his cheeks and a crooked grin, her younger brother, always trying to fix broken things, a girl with frayed braids who used to braid hers too, whispering stories of faraway lands they'd never see, and him, the one whose hands had shaken when he gave her his army dog tags the night before he vanished into the program. "The freezing will only last a few months," he had said, eyes lying for her sake. "They'll wake us when the world's better." But he never woke up. None of them did. She wasn't supposed to stay awake. She had signed the same agreement as the others, offering her body to preservation, cryogenic stasis, they called it, a last resort to save humanity after the air became poison, the food disappeared, and the sky turned silent. But the chamber malfunctioned, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was punishment, a glitch in mercy. Either way, she had awoken too soon, surrounded by walls of frost and silence, alone inside a world that had stopped waiting. She had screamed at first, fought, searched for exits, for voices, for movement. But all she found were ice blocks, and memories inside them, unclaimed. Her own block was still there, shattered from within. She visited it sometimes, looking at the spot where her body had once lain. The ice had frozen her in a fetal position, as if even the machines knew she was afraid, as if she was never meant to grow up in a world like this. There was something grotesquely poetic about it. Waking into a tomb filled with people still sleeping. She had walked for days after that, maybe weeks. The sky never changed, neither did the hunger. She passed hollow buildings, rusting cars with skeletons in the back seats, playgrounds where swings moved only because the wind remembered how. Eventually, she reached the marketplace. Something about it felt, right, familiar, not because she had been there before. She hadn't, but because it resembled everything she had lost. The warmth of community, frozen mid-motion, families who came to buy hope, lovers who once argued over silly things like price. And here it all stood, trapped in ice, waiting to be remembered. So she stayed. She made a bed under the old canopy, using clothes she found in the market stalls. She arranged the ice blocks neatly, lined them up like gravestones. She began to name them, one by one, even if she didn't know who they belonged to. The teddy bear in Block 14 became Marla. The left shoe with a name scribbled inside became Jonas. A small backpack with tiny trinkets inside became Lena's world. She spoke to them, told them stories, apologized for not being enough. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Sometimes she would scream at them, accusing them of leaving her behind. "You were supposed to wake up with me. Why didn't you?" But mostly she whispered and waited. She wasn't entirely alone. The crows came sometimes, perching on the wooden frame of the market. They watched her with beady eyes, cocking their heads in curiosity. She spoke to them too. One of them, a scruffy thing with a torn wing, she named Ash. He brought her small things, buttons, shiny bottle caps, broken rings. She made a necklace of them, wore it like armor. The cold didn't bother her anymore. Or maybe it had already seeped too deep. At night, she dreamed in fragments. The smell of her mother's hair, the weight of her brother sleeping against her shoulder, the taste of fresh water from a time when such things existed. But she never dreamed of herself. She had forgotten what it felt like to be whole, to be human. Now she was something else. A sentinel, a relic, a scar the world refused to heal. Yet there was something shifting in the air lately. The ice was growing thinner. Hairline cracks spread faster now, groaning under pressure. The sky seemed brighter, or perhaps just more watchful. Sometimes she felt as if someone was coming. And for the first time in years, a flicker of fear returned. Not because she dreaded being alone, but because she wasn't sure she remembered how to belong. What if she had changed too much? What if she was the ice now, cold, clear, and impossible to touch? She pressed a hand against the nearest block. The teddy bear inside looked back with stitched eyes. Once, someone had loved it enough to carry it through disaster. Now it waited, like her, for a world that no longer came back. She swallowed hard and whispered to the frozen silence, "Please, don't let me be the last one left." The past never really dies. It lingers in corners, clinging to rusted swings, half-burnt letters, the smell of something familiar in an unfamiliar place. Sometimes it hides in sound, a laugh that echoes through silence, or the clinking of metal tags against a soldier's chest. She heard them often now, not the real voices, perhaps, but echoes, memories that moved like smoke through the frozen air, too faint to see clearly, but impossible to ignore. The marketplace was full of them. Each block of ice wasn't just an object frozen in time. It was a story, a photograph too cold to fade. All she had to do was touch the surface, let her fingers trail across the frost, and the past would seep into her bones like a fever dream. She sat beside one now. It held a lunchbox, bright red, cartoon stickers still stuck to its side, scratched and faded from use. Her hand hovered over it, and slowly, the haze of memory returned. A girl named Luma, 7 years old. Curly hair, always tangled. She used to sit 3 rows ahead in the evacuation bus. "I don't like the cold," she'd said once, clutching that very lunchbox. "But Mama said we'll all wake up happy. You think that's true?" She remembered nodding. She had no idea. Luma hadn't made it to the cryo center. The bus never arrived. They said it was sabotage. She remembered screaming. She remembered the empty seat next to hers, the lunchbox left behind. Now it was here, preserved, sealed, waiting. She moved to another block. This one held a soldier's uniform jacket, stiff and dark, the name, R. Sahib, stitched on the chest in bold letters. Her fingers trembled before they made contact. The warmth that hit her was so sharp, it made her flinch. Rehan, he had stood beside her the night the cryo chambers opened. Tall, sunburnt, always fidgeting. He used to laugh with his eyes. When everyone was panicking, when families were separating, he was the only one who didn't pretend it was going to be okay. "This is a gamble," he'd whispered to her once, gripping her shoulder. "But we have to try, even if the world forgets us." She hadn't forgotten. He had kissed her the night before the freeze. A desperate, clumsy kiss. Not love, survival. A promise between 2 people who didn't want to die alone. She wore his dog tags still, around her neck, beneath her shirt. They were the only thing that still felt warm. There were other memories too, some less painful, some worse. Like her father's radio. She'd found it buried under rubble weeks after arriving at the market. It still worked, somehow, playing static between bursts of long-forgotten songs. She kept it with her, switching it on every morning, hoping a voice might break through one day. "Anyone out there?" She'd whispered into it countless times. No one ever answered. Still, she believed it might happen. One day. And then there were the dreams. They came like intruders, uninvited, wild, and cruel. In one dream, the ice cracked all at once. Everyone inside emerged, confused but alive. They hugged her, thanked her for keeping watch. Someone called her name, her real name. She cried, overwhelmed, human again. But just as she reached to touch their hands, they faded. The dream would shatter like glass, and she'd wake up cold, alone, heart pounding in a silence that didn't care. In another dream, she was still inside the ice. She watched the world go by from behind the frost, screaming for help no one could hear. And someone, another girl, sat outside watching, smiling, taking her place. That dream always left her breathless. What if she hadn't woken up? What if she was still asleep, and this was just her mind unraveling inside frozen flesh? She couldn't tell anymore. Once, she had tried to leave the marketplace, walked for what felt like days, following the sun, hoping for movement on the horizon. But the world beyond was empty, not just abandoned, hollow. Buildings with no walls, vehicles with no engines, cities without sound. As if history itself had been scraped clean. No bodies, no answers, just dust, wind, and that strange greenish hue in the sky. The farther she walked, the colder it got. Not in temperature, but in feeling. Like the world was punishing her for trying to forget. So she came back. The marketplace was painful, but at least it was real. Here, the ghosts still had names. Here, the ice still remembered. She stood now, walking slowly down the central aisle, like a priestess moving through a frozen cathedral. She ran her fingers along the blocks, whispering fragments of memories. This one was for Luma. This was yours, Papa. You left your boots behind, silly. She paused at the largest block. It held nothing personal, just a mirror, cracked in the center, frost blooming across its surface. She stared into it, saw herself, pale, bruised, unmoving, not quite alive, not quite dead. Her reflection didn't blink. She turned away. The wind howled through the beams above. rattling the rusted sign once again. Unclaimed final offers. It wasn't just a label anymore. It was a prophecy. The world had offered humanity a chance, and humanity had never come back to claim it. She hadn't heard footsteps in years. But now, as dusk stretched long, violet shadows across the market floor, she heard them. Slow, heavy, deliberate, crunching through frost and silence. She froze. It couldn't be the wind. The wind didn't walk. She rose from where she'd been sitting beneath the sagging canopy, her limbs stiff from hours of stillness, her breath fogged in the fading light, her fingers wrapped around the chain around her neck, Rayhan's dog tags, her only weapon against the ache inside her chest. The sound grew louder. Then it stopped. She turned slowly toward the aisle of ice blocks. And there he was, a man, or something like one. He stood at the far end of the market, silhouetted against the amber glow of the setting sun, cloaked in black, hood drawn over his face, hands folded in front like a monk at a funeral. He didn't move, didn't speak, but she could feel him, like heat radiating from a fire she had forgotten existed. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice hoarse from disuse. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised one arm, not threatening but commanding, and pointed toward the center of the market, toward the largest ice block, the one with the mirror. Her breath caught. "What do you want?" she asked. This time his voice came, not from his mouth, but inside her head. Deep, cold, final. "Choose." The word echoed like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. She blinked. "Choose what?" The figure said nothing, but behind him, the air shimmered. A faint ripple, heat, movement, life. The mountains beyond the market, long covered in mist, now glowed with an orange hue. The cracks in the ice deepened. A low hum rose from beneath her feet, like the ground was waking up. And suddenly she understood. He was not a man. Not really. He was a reckoning. A manifestation of the world's last mercy, or its final cruelty. He was offering her a choice. Preserve the past. Keep the ice intact. Let the memories remain untouched. Let the dead sleep in peace. Let the pain stay buried in frost. She could remain the guardian, the witness, eternal, or shatter it all, release the forgotten, burn the frozen history, let go of the past, let it bleed, melt, scream, and perhaps, in that fire, she would become alive again. She stood still for a long time. 1,000 voices pressed into her mind. "Don't forget me. We trusted you to remember. Don't leave us behind." She turned slowly, scanning the rows of blocks. Faces she had never seen but had imagined, names she had given to ghosts. Luma, Rayhan, Papa, the girl with braids, the boy with the crooked smile. Would letting them go be betrayal? Or freedom? She stepped toward the mirror block. Her reflection met her gaze. She looked like someone ancient, a monument to sorrow. But there was something burning behind her eyes now, something fierce, alive. Her hands trembled as she reached into the satchel tied to her hip and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside was a thick, red fluid, an ignition compound she had scavenged years ago, meant to spark heat in cryoreactors. She had kept it all this time, never knowing why. Maybe for this. She held it up, looking toward the cloaked figure. "Will they suffer?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. The answer came not in words, but in feeling, a wave of quiet acceptance, as if the world itself sighed. "No." She stepped to the center of the market. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said to the blocks around her. "I tried. I really did. I waited." A pause. "I loved you." Then, with a sharp motion, she hurled the vial to the ground. It shattered, and fire bloomed. It wasn't like normal fire. Not orange or yellow. This one burned white-blue, humming with energy as it snaked outward. It kissed the ice blocks, and they didn't scream, they sang. A strange harmony rose from the ice as it cracked, melted, collapsed. One by one, the frozen memories dissolved. The teddy bears sank into puddled frost. The lunchbox disappeared in steam. The jacket burst into vapor. The mirror shattered, and with it, her reflection fractured into light. And then silence. She stood alone at the center of the ruin, breathing hard. Steam curled around her. Ash drifted in the wind like snow. The marketplace was gone. Not erased, but released. She fell to her knees. Was this grief? Was this peace? She didn't know. She only knew it was done. The figure was gone. The sky had changed. No longer a muted green. It now shimmered faintly with golden light, as if the world had finally exhaled. Somewhere, far off, a bird called, the first she'd heard in years. She looked up, and for the first time in forever, she did not feel alone. The fire was gone. Not a single flame remained, yet the frost had melted. The ice was no more, only puddles now, scattered like broken promises across the stone floor of the marketplace. She sat alone in the center, hair damp from the heat, skin streaked with soot. Her dress clung to her like memory, thin and fragile. Her hands rested in her lap, palms empty finally. For the first time in what felt like centuries, there was no humming, no groaning of ice, no voices whispering through wind, only silence. But it was different now, not the silence of death, the silence of breath being held, just before the first word is spoken. Above her, the sign still swayed, unclaimed, final offers, but the letters had blackened in the fire. The word final had curled inward and fallen away, leaving only unclaimed offers. She smiled just a little. It felt strange,